Hello, my name's Scott Anderson and I'm making this video to talk to you about the British Empire exhibition that took place in Wembley in 1924-1925. It was the exhibition to end all exhibitions. It was designed to re-establish the idea of the superiority of the British Empire over all other powers. To some extent it worked, but obviously the British Empire was already on a downwards trajectory, so it didn't perhaps work as well as they thought, but it certainly was an amazing show. As we do today when we hold events like the Olympics, countries try and provide buildings for their various events that are going to be of use in the future. We did that when we had the recent Olympics in this country. However, in Wembley in 1924-1925, the building that really sticks with most people's thoughts and probably is one of the few reasons why people ever go to Wembley, my apologies to the inhabitants of Wembley, is Wembley Stadium. Recently rebuilt into a new design, but in its first incarnation, built in 1923, 23, as a national sports stadium. And that was a pivotal building in the whole project, but by no means the only one. However, as a pivotal building, it's not surprising that things like this medallion were issued at the 24 exhibition to illustrate the importance of that particular building. You may wonder why I'm bothering to make this video, because there are books and lots of publications on the British Empire exhibition already. And indeed there's quite a lot of YouTube films on the 1924-1925 exhibition using original film taken at the time. But this talk is really not so much about the exhibition itself, the facts and figures. It's more about the artifacts that remain with us today. It's more about, I suppose, collecting objects like this particular medallion relating to the building of the great Wembley Arena. I've always felt that historical events happen whether you want them to or not, but it's people who write history and people who experience it, and I think we can experience it, I think, much better through objects like this medallion. It means we can actually almost reach out and touch the history. So even though something might have happened hundreds of years ago, if you can just touch that history, if you can experience it firsthand through an original object like this medallion, I think that you will appreciate the exhibition a lot more. And here we have a close-up of the nice little medallion I've been showing you. It looks very different of sort of size it must be on your screen. It will have obviously been something that many people have collected in 1924 when they visited the British Empire exhibition, but I'm sure that many people have got mementos stretching right the way through to almost the present day in terms of their commemorating their visits to the Wembley Stadium. When it was built, of course, as I said, it was the Empire Stadium, became the Wembley Stadium later on. This medallion, I think, does the job of showing us what it's like. It shows us the basic architecture of the site, the rather nice towers at the front there. But the thing that I quite like about this is the way the football pitch has been marked out in the centre. The lines, the football pitch, are, as we know, only white lines on turf, but on this particular medallion design, they assume the importance of the basic architecture. So I don't know how people will have felt at the time about the additional sporting activities there, the running track and so forth. But it does look that the design of this little medallion right from the very beginning took into account the importance of the game of football. Here we have a nice view of the terrace of the main facade of the Wembley Stadium, or the Empire Stadium as it was. Those towers that you see have become quite iconic. I'm afraid that I've still not quite got used to the fact they no longer exist. The structure was demolished, I think, about 2002 to make way for the new stadium that we see today. Every time I go on the Metropolitan line past the site, I think back to how it used to look compared to the, well, quite glorious stadium that exists there today with its huge lighting arc. But I do like the architecture of the building as it was in the 1920s and beyond. The actual exhibition itself didn't start until 1924, but work started on the football and athletics stadium as early as January 1922. Huge construction project. The stadium was built to house 125,000 people. So you can get the idea that it was considered to be a very large sporting venue in its day. Because it was large didn't mean that it took a long time to build, and it's quite wonderful, I think, to think that back in the 20s a building like this could be created in 10 months, and it was. 10 months is all it took to build this iconic sports ground. If you think about that, yes, it was ready for the 1923 FA Cup final that took place in April of that year, and so the stadium itself was going strongly well before the rest of the exhibition, which didn't open until about a year later. The rather colourful plan shows us the whole site. It's around about 216 acres, so I expect most visitors needed a plan to avoid becoming lost as they travelled around the vast expanse of the exhibition. You can see right at the top of the plan this large red dot, and that's where the Wembley Park station was, the underground station. And then if you look down onto the left-hand side, you can see where all those omnibuses and cars are parked, one of the other main entrances. If you look to the red dot, or area marked out in red here, you can see the location of the stadium. So right at the bottom, I suppose, or the southern edge of the site. But nevertheless, if you are thinking in terms of getting off at the station and then walking through the area, that shows itself as a large formal garden, and then through this wonderful processional way towards the station, you get some idea of just how important the stadium was in the general scheme of things. More than 50 of the territories that comprise the British Empire in the 1920s were in attendance at the exhibition. They had a variety of pavilions, both large and small, but the area within the large red rectangle that you see on the plan at the moment does show us where the principal buildings, other than the Empire Stadium, were. Inside the rectangle, you can see the building which is known as the Palace of Industry, next to it the Palace of Engineering, the latter represented by a train. There were several engines on display in the Palace of Engineering. To the left of the Palace of Industry is a very small building that's just got the word art written in it, and that is the Palace of Art. More of that later. To the south of these very large exhibition buildings we can see some rippling blue and white lines, and these are scenic lakes where you could take boat trips. To the south of the lakes, or on the other side of the lakes, at the southern edge of the square, are the very large pavilions of Australia and Canada. Whilst on the right-hand side of the square is the very interesting pavilion, quite large, representing India. Other pavilions of all shapes and sizes were built and representing lots of different countries throughout the site. To the right of the large red rectangle, you can probably see a red circle, and this gives us the location of one of the most important buildings at the exhibition. This is the HM Government Building, and this stressed the importance not just of the overseas territories, but of Britain itself, and in particular the history of the empire, albeit from a British point of view. On the screen at the moment is the fold-away maps cover. The map's quite sizable, but it folds down to a standard map size, I suppose, if you're used to the old Ordnance Survey maps. And this is a very nice example of the map and cover. Can't see the map now, of course, but it would come in within this cover. Nice thing about this is that it's actually still got the name of the people who purchased it, and if I read correctly, they were there visiting, this couple, Mr. and Mrs. were visiting the exhibition on June, I think it is, the 14th in 1924. Maps and all sorts of leaflets like this are still fairly readily available on auction sites for, well, not very much money, but rather nice to have one that's still with its original owner's name on it. Now we see the British government's pavilion. The official guidebook for 1925 said of the British government pavilion, and I quote, "No section of the Empire exhibition drew a larger patronage or a louder praise in 1924 than the British government pavilion. The lions on guard, the towering columns, the national flags, the windows of the special suite of rooms reserved for their Majesties the King and Queen. All these externals attracted the earliest attention of visitors, and once within the pavilion, they found that the promises were honoured to the full." Unquote. Very impressive for this building. All sorts of exhibitions inside it, including the Army, Navy, the Air Force, the military might that had made the British Empire come into existence in the first place and now maintained it in the form that it was in 1924. Overall, the palaces of industry and art and engineering and the British government pavilion seem to conform to, I suppose, a fairly classical architectural style. Look, this particularly looks as if it's derived from a Greek temple. They're not purist versions of ancient classical architecture. They're very much moulded by the current architectural fashions of the day, and I think particularly of the Art Deco style. But this massive display of classical building, this very much a sort of institutional building style, was designed to make sure that people knew that the British Empire was everlasting and very powerful. When I look at a black and white picture like this, again, you can pick up lots of photographs, postcards like this, very, very cheaply indeed, £1 or £2. I think to myself that it's rather a dull picture. And that leads me on to looking at another category of finds that, or collectibles that one might chase up. If we look, for example, at this display of the British Government Pavilion, it does seem somewhat nicer. It's amazing what a bit of colour can do. The lions are perhaps a little bit cartoon-like and not quite as leonine as they might well have been. But overall, I think you get a much nicer appreciation of the building when it's in colour. That last picture you've seen, the coloured postcard, brings me into another area of collecting for the exhibition that I think almost everyone could afford. The nice thing about things like exhibition memorabilia is that they're often very, very inexpensive. That's the point for someone like me, someone who spent all their life as a university academic, can tell you that you never get rich from being a university academic. Unfortunate as that may be, there are lots of other rewards that come your way. Hopefully your students go out and perhaps they make the money and you feel you've been part of it. However, postcards are something that many people can collect, even on a modest income. And with something like the British Empire exhibition, there are a lot of them. This is just a fan of a number of the ones that are available, and really, you know, for £1, £2, something like that, these are readily available even now, almost a century later. There were so many people that visited that exhibition, and many of them bought postcards. Postcard collecting had been very popular since the late Victorian period, and it continued to be so, and still does to this very day. But certainly in the 1920s, it was at one of its peaks, I suppose, and all manner of postcards were produced for the exhibition. Some of them were black and white, or like this one in sepia, as you can probably see, but many of them were these ones that I particularly like, which are artists' interpretation. This, for example, if you can see it, is the picture of the Indian Pavilion, another one of the great countries showing at the exhibition. This one in front of me here now that I'm looking at, the Burma Pavilion. There is something for everybody, I think, with postcards, and these were produced at the time. They are alright, they are artist impressions, so in a way they're a little bit like looking at things at one step removed, but they were produced at the time, and particularly the straight photographs, such as the sepia one there, they are original documents from the period, and they take you right back to the mid-1920s. They take you back to the exhibition. I'm sure that cards like this meant that people who visited the show enjoyed the show more, because they had these as little memories, as little keepsakes for the future. But today, for us, they retain the same value, and to my mind, quite often much better than reading through the dry old pages of a history book. This is the sort of thing that brings history to life for me. Artist coloured representations on postcards, such as the one you have on the screen at the moment, may not give us the pinpoint accuracy of a photograph, black or white or otherwise, but I suspect they are in many ways much better at conveying the emotions associated with the joy of a visit that you may have made at the time to the British Empire exhibition. Looking at the lady with the orange parasol in the front of the boat, going across the lake, you can almost see the smile on her face as she talks to, presumably, her husband who sits next to her. On the bridge, the couple with the red parasol, you can almost hear or imagine you can almost hear their conversations. Because trips to the British Empire exhibition, like trips to anywhere else. That longed for day out or vacation. It's all about how we remember things, and we probably remember what we did rather than what we saw. Although, to be fair, as you would expect, that wonderful stadium looms large, even in the postcard series. Here's another very nice image that shows the Australia Pavilion. Notice how the pavilion is set off by the lake in front of it and all the activity, those boats, canoes, etc. Nice bridges taking you from one side to the other, which again add that little bit of the feeling for the exotic. They're almost like Venetian bridges in some places, with their centres high above the water. So plenty of wonderful vistas, and obviously a nice lake helps to improve the view. What I do like about a picture like this, not just the facade, the design of the building, the flags flying, but things like those globes, those lights, electric lights on top of the entrance pylons to this bridge. Things like that, very, very nice little details. Or look at the couple in the foreground. What a wonderful Art Deco 20s hat that lady is wearing. And notice how I think every man in the picture is wearing a trilby or some form of rather formal headwear. And perhaps, like me, and when you see pictures like this, you think perhaps of your own father or grandfather who wouldn't ever leave the house without his trilby. And yet another, this time the Canada Pavilion, lovely view in the distance of that marvellous bridge again. But look at this Canadian Pavilion or Canada Pavilion. Again, this sort of classical style, very imposing. The Dominions, Canada and Australia, showing that they can keep up, as it were, with Big Brother, the British, whose empire they were part of at the time. Improving the architectural vista of a scene by adding water, boats, happy tourists, etc., is a trick that all artists have known, I'm sure, for a very, very long time. But you can make things even that little bit better by taking electric lights into the equation. Here we can see the Canada Pavilion by night. It just adds that little bit of mystique and an additional way of looking at a building. We've seen some of the very large buildings associated with the British Empire exhibition in 1924-1925, but we shouldn't forget that dotted all over the exhibition grounds were many smaller kiosks, usually kiosks selling newspapers, confectionery, or in this instance you can see Toffee Deluxe. Macintosh is not the only toffee vendor to have an interesting little kiosk like this. I've seen postcards relating to quite a lot of different kiosks, including Sharp's toffees, which quite often made them as much the talk of the show as the larger buildings themselves. These were buildings where you could go and spend your money. You could buy a box of commemorative toffees or chocolates. You could buy all manner of things from kiosks like this one. I particularly liked that last postcard. I'm very fond of the kiosk architecture, as I suggested when I was talking about it in the last image. Some of the kiosks are absolutely fantastic, and you can hardly believe that they existed in the form they did at the time. There were over 30 kiosks out at the show, and there were almost innumerable inside stands in the large exhibition buildings. Many of the firms that were exhibiting in the Palace of Industry, for example, issued their own medallions. Some of them were sort of official ones. This one, for example, this is looks like a coin, this medallion celebrates commerce and industry. This one very much an official, well, almost like a coin. This medallion, very heavy bronze coin. This one was actually produced by the Royal Mint, whereas other ones, a bit like the medallion you saw for the Wembley Arena, were made to a lesser spec, as it were. And so, for example, things like this this particular one was produced by a commercial company, and if you look at it, it's quite interesting. These things were produced to act as keepsakes, just like the postcards, but you can see here that you could also wear them, I suppose, and this one still has its original, like an official medal would have. This one has its official ribbon, the red, white and blue of the British Empire. So rather interesting. Most of them no longer retain the cloth ribbons, but it's nice to get one that does. Anyway, let's have a look at some of these medallions in a little more detail. This image shows two sides of a medallion put out by J.R. Gaunton's sons. They describe themselves as being medalists to His Majesty the King, and had bases in Birmingham and London. They look to have been a rather august organisation. It says there at the bottom of the coin, established for 200 years. However, despite this long history, they probably made most of their money out of orders for other things that are listed on the coin. Badges, buckles, buttons, whistles, souvenirs, advertising novelties. So it all sounds very good. But from this very, very, as I say, august sounding company, other companies that produced their coins were less august. This is another one like the Gaunt coin. This features the Herrick lion, the lion designed by Herrick, which was to be seen all over the British Empire exhibition. And if we look at the other side of this one, it's not anything to do with His Majesty the King. It's for a company who make toothpaste. Probably heard of them, Gibbs Dentifrice, and they exhibited at the show as well. And it's surprising the range of companies that produce these amazing medallions. So there were lots and lots of items that you could collect, and medallions were just the tip of the iceberg. Leaving medallion designs behind for a moment, let us continue our ramble through the grounds of the exhibition. If you'd come in through the northern entrance to the exhibition, the first thing you'd have seen would have been these beautiful formal gardens, the lovely statue you can see, lots of flowers, and this would have been a very nice way to approach the Palace of Industry. The Palace of Industry, here seen in a nighttime view, was the second largest building of the exhibition. Along with its slightly larger neighbour, the Palace of Engineering, the two buildings covered over 25 acres and did form a major focal part of the exhibition. The buildings were some of the last to go, as it were, after the exhibition. Many of the buildings in the exhibition, of course, disappeared almost immediately, being temporary structures. But both of these two great palaces were built out of the new reinforced concrete. It was easier to leave them where they were, to convert them into factories, warehousing, etc. Much, much easier and much cheaper than to demolish them. Inside the Palace of Industry, as you can see on this black and white photograph, there are a number of stands. They all had to conform to a certain standard. The director of the UK exhibits, a man called Sir Lawrence Weaver, was quite rigorous in making sure that everyone conformed to the right standards. There were lots of different exhibitors in the Palace of Industries, everything from Gibbs Dentifrice, as we've seen, the toothpaste company, through to biscuit manufacturers like Huntley and Palmer's, and even Courtaulds, Boots the chemist. All these sort of people were showing their products, quite often how the products were made as well. What I find particularly interesting is something that you probably can only just make out in the distance. If you look at the centre area, the rear of this picture, you can see what looks to be almost like an Egyptian pylon, and on top of the pylon is, and it's almost indistinguishable from the background, but you can just about see a crouching lion. Lions were everywhere. On all the literature was the lion designed by J.C. Herrick. You've already seen some examples of that. But there were other lions as well, those designed by another architect outside the HM Government building, but also this one, a magnificent lion, very aggressive, showing, I suppose, symbolising British determination and the fact that the empire was still very much alive and well and continuing much as it had done before, making sure that it was, well, if not top dog, then top lion. The lion on top of this pylon, as it were, is, of course, designed not by Herrick. Herrick lion is quite a friendly looking creature. This one is much more stylised and designed by a chap called Percy Metcalf. Having seen the interior of the Palace of Industry, it seems only fitting that one should look at this wonderful medallion struck to commemorate industry and commerce at the British Empire exhibition in 1924. You can see the architecture of industry on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side of the image, we can see this magnificent and somewhat stylised lion. Lots of lions at the British Empire exhibition, of course. The J.C. Herrick lion, which we've mentioned before. But this is another one of those, shall we say, more realistic, but certainly perhaps more menacing lions, which was designed by Percy Metcalf for this particular medallion. We can just about see the initials that refer to the designer, Percy Metcalf. I've added the white circle there so you can see quite clearly the PM, which are the designer's initials, which appears on both sides of the coin. My favourite design for a medallion at the British Empire exhibition is this one by Percy Metcalf. Metcalf was trained in Leeds at the School of Art and subsequently went on to the Royal College of Art, where he decided to take up sculpture and object design. Some of his designs for medals and coinage are well known, in particular the series that he produced in 1928, the first coinage for the Irish Free State. This one, however, is one of his very, very best designs. It combines all the latest in Art Deco stylisation. When you look at this very vital, vigorous lion, and the stylisation of the mane, you start to really see a move away from the traditional images of lions, such as those in Trafalgar Square. In the background, of course, to back up the power of the lion, we have the grandest building, perhaps, of the exhibition, and that is, of course, the Wembley Stadium. Those iconic towers that we looked at the beginning of this talk. Metcalf certainly excelled himself here, and there is a letter held by the National Records Office from Sir Lawrence Weaver to Mr. R.A. Johnson of the Royal Mint. Weaver not only really controlled all the British exhibits at the British Empire exhibition, but also was instrumental in founding the Ashtead Pottery Company at 1923. It lasted through to about 1935, when Weaver died rather prematurely. And he was very keen on design. So it's not surprising that he was quite pleased with the design he commissioned from Percy Metcalf. The letter from Weaver to Johnson reads as follows. Dear Mr. Johnson, many thanks for your letter of the 19th. It's dated the 21st of May, this particular letter, 1924. So many thanks for your letter of the 19th instant, which, with samples of the medals, which I think look really beautiful. And then he goes on to say, Metcalf's lion seems to me a triumph. And was he wrong? No, I don't think he was. This really is the design that was perhaps the most outstanding of all at the British Empire exhibition. It was a design that was produced to be given to the stallholders, the various companies that showed their wares and their techniques at the exhibition, and really is quite remarkable. I mention the Ashtead pottery because Ashtead pottery produced a plaque, a large ceramic plaque, which had a section at the top where you could insert your medal, and below it, in much larger scale, a picture of this wonderful lion in relief. You don't see too many of those. The last one that I saw going through a website auction made rather a lot of money. But the actual medallions themselves are still quite reasonably priced. We can, if you haven't spotted it, we can have a look at Metcalf's initials just behind the front paws of this magnificent lion. And there they are. No mistaking who the designer of this particular medallion was. Moving on and continuing a little bit in the thread of what we've just been talking about, let's just have a little bit of a think about the Palace of Arts. As you can see here, this is for 1925. It's the illustrated souvenir of Palace of Arts. So it's not the 1924 version, it's the 1925. And on the outside cover, as with virtually all the stationery that you see coming out of the exhibition, it has the Herrick lion. If you had visited the Palace of Arts in 1925, not only would you see a great many paintings, but there was also a section dedicated to the decorative arts. And from my point of view, one of the most interesting exhibits that you could see in the 25 exhibition was the next one on the screen. This is a lion in glazed pottery designed by, guess who, Percy Metcalf, and executed by the Ashtead Potters Ltd. The Ashtead Potters was a firm set up by Sir Lawrence Weaver to help injured ex-servicemen after the First World War, and I suppose a few even later than that. The lion is, of course, based very much on the one that you've just seen on the medallion. It comes in two sizes. One's quite small, about 7 or 8 inches tall, whereas the larger one is about 14 inches, I suppose, in the pre-decimal measurements that would have been used by the Ashtead Potters. Metcalf didn't just produce this design, he produced several others, and indeed J.C. Herrick's design was also reproduced by the Ashtead Potters.
Well, what a lion. Powerful, Art Deco, very Art Deco in its design, the Percy Metcalf lion. So popular did the design become that this company, the Gnozo toothpaste company, this company
asked Ashtead Potters to make another lion figure for them. This one, very similar to the one you've just seen, but it's slightly smoother, less angular, I suppose a little less stylish, but pretty much the same, apart from in a few details. If you look down the side, you can see it says on there British made, and British made Ganozo, and at the front of the plinth it actually says Ganozo toothpaste, and then on this side it's just the Ganozo mark again. It's a wonderful thing, and with its fangs, you can probably see just here, a very wonderful reminder, a great artifact from the designs produced for the exhibition. So there we go, another Percy Metcalf lion. The British Empire exhibition of 1924 was so successful that it was decided to stage it again from the spring through to the autumn of 1925. And here on the screen we can see a picture of the official guidebook for that second season. It's rather a fanciful view, I think, of the British Empire exhibition, but nevertheless quite an inspiring one, which led to another 10 million plus visitors coming to see the exhibition. The 1925 season saw the introduction of several new amusements and entertainments, such as London Defended, which was a series of air displays that took place throughout May for 6 nights a week. Planes painted red and bedecked with white fairy lights were picked up as they flew over the Wembley Arena by searchlights, and fake bombs and explosions took place. It must have been really very exciting indeed. The amusement park covered a vast area of the exhibition. In 1925, there were lots of new things to see. There were new rides, there were refurbished rides, lots of new potential. Good place to take the children. Though, as you can see in this sepia postcard, there are a lot more adults visiting the amusement park and then there are children. Perhaps there's a few in the bottom right-hand corner there. I think this is very impressive and very Art Deco looking amusement park entrance. On the screen at the moment we can see an artist impression in black and white of the entrance to the amusement park for the British Empire exhibition. Nice to spot a few things like the tea room on the left-hand side there, and a sign for cloakrooms. Fortunately, I think this is a nicer day in terms of the climate than that which we've just seen, but it still looks a little bit drab, perhaps, in black and white. So let's just change it to colour and see the improvement. Inside the amusement park, you can see an absolute wonder of things to do. It doesn't look very crowded there, but it does remind one of, I suppose, personal experiences of visiting places like Disneyland. And there would have been times in the height of the summer, I'm sure, and in the school holidays, when the crowd, or the weight of the crowd, is absolutely enormous. It would have been rather difficult to move, I think. As you can see, there was even a small mountain built into the amusement park. Although it was great for children, it was also great, I'm sure, for adults. And the adults, of course, also had the opportunity to go along in the evening when the additional advantage of electric lighting must have made things much more exciting. You can see one of the roundabouts here, and there were number of roundabouts. You can still see on the right hand side fairy lights running up and down one of the fake mountains that there are supposed to have been at the time. So it looks very exciting, and looking at the warm glow on the spectators, you can see they're all having a lovely time. Well, that's almost the end, I'm afraid. We've just finished looking at that wonderful roundabout. Nice evening out at the British Empire exhibition. However, if you were wanting a little bit more of a sedentary visit, and didn't want to go on the rides or pound through all those wonderful palaces of this, that and the other, you might want to go shopping, either at the kiosks that I've mentioned earlier on, or at the many other stands in the exhibition. Many of the stands were selling things, just like the kiosks, and of course, as Ashtead Potters had a stand to sell their wares, so did a number of others. Companies like Goss China, for example. And many of these, particularly ceramics firms, were selling things like this, which has a wonderful design on the front, and this commemorative china. It shows us Britannia with a shield with a Union Jack. It has a ship from the Royal Navy, and it also has all the industry that the country has to support things like national wealth, the Navy, etc. And then the whole thing surrounded by the flags of Britain and the Empire. So really lots of stuff like this. This is a small plate, and something like this today you can still pick up for £2 or £3. There were similar crested vases, ashtrays, even some strange models, for example, of various animals and things like this. So some of you who are interested in collecting crested china, well, perhaps you'd give the British Empire exhibition a thought. It wasn't just china that you could buy. We've already seen the postcards, for example, and the medallions, but there were metal goods as well. So, for example, you could buy ashtrays embossed with the Herrick British Empire lion, for example. You could buy almost like cannonball shaped brass tea caddies put out by Lipton's, the tea company. There are all sorts of things you could buy, and many of them really costing very little. And I'll show you this wonderful little thing that I bought recently. This little monkey figure was also produced for the British Empire exhibition. Something just simple and probably quite cheap at the time to buy, to remind you of what I hope has been a wonderful visit today, but also a wonderful visit for the people who actually went to the exhibition in either 1924 and 1925. So, a wonderful concept of empire was put forward in the 1920s, but essentially, I suppose, really feeling as if it was, for all its Art Deco touches, still feeling as it was a little bit Victorian. This is nothing to do with the British Empire exhibition. This is the 1938 Empire exhibition in Glasgow, and I think if we can just zoom in on that, we can see that very modern, almost science fiction looking building. Things had changed quite dramatically between 1925 and 1938. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and it's fairly new, my channel, but if you would like to keep an eye on the Scott Anderson Art and Design History channel, we'll have some more for you, I hope, in the near future. So thanks once again. Enjoy your collecting. Bye.